that. So welcome, good afternoon everyone. Thanks for joining me on this webinar this afternoon. We are going to talk about contracting for meals in the CACFP and some things that we are looking for from our sponsors when you contract for meals. My name is Laura Hodson. I am in the Topeka office here. I am recently took a position as procurement specialist for our team, as well as continuing to be a CACFP consultant. So as my role as procurement specialist, I help work on all of the ins and outs of the contracting for meals, as well as some of the school district contracts. So that's a new role that I'm taking on, and I've been wanting to do a webinar like this for a while, so it's nice to be able to give this information to you and present it to you all. I think it's good information to have, and it's a good review and important information. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Please feel free, if you have questions as I'm going along, type them in the chat box. I will be watching the chat box. I have other people watching the chat box that can help respond as well. So don't hesitate to ask your questions. I did give my email address in the chat box earlier. If you want to receive a copy of the PowerPoint slides after the presentation today, just shoot me an email and I'll be happy to share those slides with you. I did slate about an hour for this. I don't believe that it will take me an hour to get through, but I wanted to give us plenty of time to get through the material and answer any questions that you guys have. Okay, so I'm not, there we go. Okay, so our agenda is pretty short and sweet. I am going to review some general procurement requirements, and most of these things should be reviewed for you guys who have already been participating on CACFP. So we will go over some general procurement requirements. Then we're going to look at what's entailed in completing the contract and making sure that you're following procurement requirements when completing the contract. And then we're going to talk about monitoring the contract. And that is something that in the past we haven't talked a whole lot about. And so I think that's really important today to discuss what your requirements are as a sponsor for monitoring a contract when you are using a vendor. All right, so most of you have probably seen our procurement flow chart. This has been out for a couple years, but I want to review it because the amount of your meal contract will determine the type of procurement processes that you will follow. And so just as a review, any contract or purchase that is under $250,000, which is the federal threshold that USDA has set forth and we follow in the state of Kansas, anything under $250,000 is considered a small purchase, and you can follow the small purchase procedures when procuring that contract. And we will focus on that today. I believe in Kansas we might only have 1 or 2 contracts in CACFP that exceed the $250,000. So today, for the purposes of this webinar, I am going to focus on the small purchase or informal procurement processes. If that contract does exceed the $250,000 threshold, then the sponsor is required to follow formal procurement procedures. And that's a much more detailed process. There are a lot of things that you have to make sure that you're complying with when you're doing formal. And so we'll touch on that a little bit here in a little while. But again, like I said, there's only maybe a few sponsors that do that. So we are going to focus our time on small purchases for the contracts. So I want to begin by talking about the requirement for sponsors to have a purchasing plan. And this is nothing new. So sponsors have been required for the last several years to have a purchasing plan. And what's important to note on this is that your purchasing plan that you have needs to have the information for your contract for meals on it. How will you procure your contract for meals? So even though you may purchase, and most sponsors do purchase, other food outside of their meal contract, those procurements would be indicated on your purchasing plan. But you need to make sure that if you are contracting for meals, that purchasing procedure is included in that plan. So that would include your purchasing method, if you're using small purchase or if you're using formal purchasing, as well as information about the monitoring of the contract, or what the purchasing plan says is contract management. That's just another way of saying monitoring. Who's responsible for monitoring those things in the contract? And you'll have a better idea of that once we talk about the monitoring of the contract, as far as who in your organization would be responsible for that. But please make sure you're reviewing those purchasing plans that you have to make sure that they include the procurement of your meal contracts. So that purchasing plan for each sponsor is in CANClaim. So if you're not part of the certification procedure for your sponsor, you can find that purchasing plan in CANClaim under the checklist tab. So each sponsor has a purchasing plan uploaded there. Okay, so the next thing that each sponsor is responsible for keeping is a standard of conduct. And again, this was implemented at the same time as the purchasing plan, so all sponsors do have this as well. And this is important because this lines out the standards of conduct for any staff member for the sponsor who is involved in procuring or involved in the management or administration of a contract when you go into it. So the sponsor basically needs to make sure that anybody who's involved in the procurement of the contract, or then after the contract is in place, administering the contract, is not receiving gifts and gratuities, making sure that there's if there are less than arm's length transactions, things like that, that's lined out. So that's what the standard of conduct is. We have the template there that most sponsors use. If your organization already has a standard of conduct for this, then that's probably what is being used and what was uploaded. Okay, so I want to make sure that you all know where you can find information about the actual meal contracts on our website. So when you go to our website at caneat.org, all of our meal contract documents that are available can be found in the CACFP link, and then under administration, which is going to be that blue bar along the top. If you hover your mouse over administration, then you'll have an option for meal contracts. And so I just want to review that we do have meal contract information there. We do have a memo that is helpful when beginning the procurement process. It gives a nice little overview of the procurement procedure. It has a little chart on it that indicates what documents you need to send in according to what kind of contract you're using. So please make sure you're reading through that memo before you start your contract procurement. And then the price quotation record we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. And then we do have the actual vendor contract prototype. So this is where you can download the actual prototype contract that you will complete with your vendor. And then you have your transport sheets and some of the other documentation that you may need if you are doing a formal contract, which I do want to note that the solicitation contract, which is what we use for formal contracts over $250,000, is not available on our website. If you think that you are going to be exceeding the $250,000 for your contract and you will need to do formal procurement, please contact us. You can contact me, or you can contact your consultant, and we can get you the documents that you need, and we can work with you on that procedure. So all of our information that you will likely need will be at our website there. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the price quotation record, because it's likely that this is the first document that you're going to complete before you even do your contract, because you are required to collect bids regardless of whether you're using small purchase methods or formal purchasing. You still have to collect bids, and you have to document those bids. And so this is key. They need to be documented. We know that in many communities there are not a lot of options for you to contract with, and so we know that it can be a struggle to get bids. However, keep in mind that we consider the sponsor contacting a vendor, a potential vendor, to be a bid. In other words, if you email or put in a phone call to a potential vendor, such as a school district or such as a hospital or a private catering company, and you request a bid and they indicate to you that they are not interested in providing meals for your child care and they do not want to give you a quote, then that is sufficient. You need to document that on your price quotation record or whatever document you're using to show your bids. But you would indicate on there that you did contact them, when you contacted them, and that they did not wish to give a bid. Okay? Make sure that on your price quotation record you are including the vendor that you are going to contract with. So that is considered a bid, the one that you choose to go with. Now, the one caveat to using the price quotation record is sponsors who are contracting with a school district are not required to show that they went out for bid. And so even though you may have gone out for bid and you contacted other vendors and then decided to go with a school district, that's fine. If you are in a community where you know that the school district has already agreed to provide meals to your facilities, then you do not have to collect other bids. You can go directly to them and contract with them. But please make sure that you are keeping record of those price quotations or those bids. And this will be any time you are going out for a new contract, which would be pretty much annually. On your product specifications, that's basically going to be what you're looking for. Most of the time, it's pretty common to see sponsors contracting for, let's say, lunches. So they're looking for a vendor who can supply approximately 50 lunches per day to children ages 3 to 5. And so that would be my specification, and it would be the same for each vendor. It's the same specification that you're going out and you're looking for potential vendors to give you a quote for that same specification. Okay. So once you have your price quotation record, you've done your legwork to find your vendor, and you've got that documented, then you are ready to go ahead and begin completion of the contract. And so, like I said, the vended meal contract, which you will use for those contracts that fall underneath $250,000, can be accessed on our website there. So you can print that and begin working with your vendor to complete that contract. The solicitation contract that you see there on the right is the one that you would use if you are procuring a contract over $250,000, and this is what you have to request directly from us at KSDE, and we will work with you to make sure that you are following all of the required procedures for advertising for your bids and choosing the vendor. You do have to do a cost analysis before you begin the formal solicitation. So there are other factors that come into play when you're doing formal procurement. So we would like to work with sponsors one-on-one when they choose to do that. So if you are using the vended contract, you can go ahead and print that and complete that with your vendor. All right, so basically the way that the vended contract is set up, I do want to mention that the vended contract prototype is set up so that it can be used with any of our child nutrition programs. And so for those of you who are familiar with that contract, you will notice that it includes options for the vendor to mark what programs they are providing meals for, if it's going to be under the school lunch program, the CACFP, if it's at risk, or if it's summer food service. So that will be specified. And some of those programs have specific contract language that don't apply to CACFP. And so as you read through the contract, you may see something that does not look familiar. And I think in general, we have tried to specify what program that contract language is for, if it is specific to a certain program. So some places you will see for NSLP or for CACFP, things like that. So keep in mind that this is a contract that is used for multiple child nutrition programs and not just CACFP. All right, so I want to talk about monitoring the contract. And monitoring the contract includes everything from monitoring the menus to the record keeping that the vendor is providing to the delivery and the billing of the meals from the vendor. So I want to talk about each one of those things individually. And it's important to note that just because you are having a vendor supply meals for you, that does not release you as a sponsor from any responsibility of overseeing those meals. You actually do still have quite a bit of work that you need to do to make sure that those meals are in compliance with our requirements and that the vendor is doing what they told you they would do. All right, so the first thing is menus. So the sponsor is responsible for reviewing and approving the menus that are provided by the vendor. So it is up to you as the sponsor to look at those menus and make sure that they meet the requirements that you have for CACFP meals. They still have to follow all of the meal pattern requirements. And as most of you know, with the new meal pattern requirements, we have things like the whole grain rich requirement once per day. We have sugar limits on yogurts and cereals, and we have a requirement that no grain-based desserts can be served. And so those are things that you need to review when looking at your menus, depending on what meals you're contracting for. But one thing to keep in mind, for example, is if your vendor is not providing whole grain rich grains, then that means that you as the sponsor, if you're just vending for lunches, let's say, and your vendor does not supply a product that's whole grain rich, then you as the sponsor would be responsible for making sure that your remaining meals during the day, at least one of them includes a whole grain rich item. You are responsible for notifying your contractor mid-year, let's say, if we do have meal pattern changes or we have updates that could affect those menus that the contractor is providing. So you do need to make sure that you are giving your contractor or your vendor the most up-to-date information. And I will say that with our trainings that we have online, this would be a great opportunity for you to share those online trainings or the access, how to get to the online trainings with your vendors, because there is no reason that a vendor could not take one of our meal pattern trainings so that they have the most up-to-date information. So I encourage you to share the online training link with your vendors and let them know the trainings that are out there that might benefit them in preparing meals for you. Another thing that I want to note, and this is from the contract. So part of the contract, when you look at it under the meal program requirements, and there's a section for menu planning and approval, it does say that the contractor shall provide menus to the sponsor on a select one, which is you drop down. So in the contract, what you're doing is you're filling in the blank of how often the vendor or the contractor will supply menus to you. So make sure that you are filling that in, and make sure that it is a time frame that you agree on. So if you want the contractor to provide their menus to you a week in advance of when they're going to serve them, or if you want them a month in advance of when they plan to serve them, that is up to you. That's something that you decide, and you can work with the vendor on this to decide what's best, but really ultimately it has to be approved by you. So if the vendor wants to say, well, I'll give you the menu the day before I serve it, and you say, no, that's not going to work, I don't have time, that doesn't give me enough time to review the menu, then that's fine. It needs to be something that you can agree on. But make sure you are paying attention to that so that the vendor or the contractor is providing menus to you with enough time for you to review them. Another thing I want to bring up from the contract in that same section is a paragraph about unacceptable meals. And basically it talks about how no payment shall be made for meals that are spoiled, unwholesome, do not meet meal pattern requirements, or disallowed by appropriate authority, which would typically be us at KSDE. So keep in mind that if the vendor or the contractor is not providing you meals that meet meal pattern requirements, that you would not necessarily be required to pay for those meals, because they did in their contract indicate that they would serve meals that meet meal pattern. So be careful when you approve the menus. If you're approving menus that don't meet meal pattern requirements, then that could be an issue. But if they're submitting menus to you and they meet requirements according to the menu, and you've approved them, and then they end up serving or bringing you meals that are different and that don't meet meal pattern requirements, then per the contract, you would not be responsible for payment of those meals if they are not allowed to be claimed for reimbursement. All right. So record-keeping requirements for your contractors. They are required by the contract to provide documentation of the meals that they serve or the meals that they provide to you. Excuse me. We do have this is a newer meal transport sheet. It came out in about a year ago, actually, February of 2019. So if you don't have the updated meal transport sheet, if your vendor is not using the new transport sheet, I would encourage you to print this. It is on the website where you can find your meal contract information. I would encourage you to print this or share with them the link to the new transport sheet. So one thing I do want to mention that we really are going to start looking a little bit more carefully at with transport sheets is that the vendor is really being specific about what they are providing to you. So in other words, if they are bringing you, let's say, let me think of a good example, or an example, apples. Apples is really, really easy. They say, okay, we're bringing apples, fresh apples, and the serving size is a half a cup. Saying that they provided 50 servings really isn't giving us the information that we need. We really want to know how many pounds of apples they provided you. If they brought 10 pounds of apples and the intended serving size is a half a cup, then that would be what would be expected. Or a lot of times vendors will do number 10 cans of fruit, and so if it has serving size of a half a cup of fruit and they put 50 servings of canned peaches, we really want to know how many number 10 cans that they provided you of peaches. Okay, so really your vendor should be more specific about what they're providing you. The other thing that I want to make sure that sponsors are aware of is that it is your right to request labels, especially nutrition labels and CN labels of products that your vendors are providing. They still have to comply with the requirement for CN labels. So if they're bringing chicken patty sandwiches to you as part of a meal, then those chicken patties would need to be appropriately labeled to be served in a child nutrition program. And that is in the contract. It's part of complying with the meal pattern. So you absolutely should be requesting from your vendor that they provide to you any child nutrition labels or any other nutrition labels that would be pertinent to you making sure that they're meeting meal pattern requirements. If it's a recipe, if it's like a combination dish that they're providing to you, you can ask for the recipe to make sure that the amount of, let's say, meat in a combination dish would be adequate for the number of children that you are serving or the number of meals that you are requesting. So make sure that they are providing that documentation to you. Transport sheets or something similar with the same information that is coming from the vendor should be sent daily or with each meal, and it should be retained on file with the sponsor. Okay, so that if we come out to do a KSDE visit, either at a site or with the sponsor for an administrative review, that we would have access to be able to review those transport sheets. So make sure those are retained. This is the same situation as with menus, as far as if the contractor is not doing what they should be doing according to the contract, as far as payment for meals. So if they are not providing you with meal documentation, basically what happens is if we were to come out on an administrative review and you did not have documentation of the meals provided from your vendor, then we would potentially disallow meals that were served that were not documented. And so that basically comes back onto the vendor. You would not then have to pay the vendor. Now, it is up to the sponsor to deal with that, and you do have to notify the sponsor of any meals or any payment that will not be made and why. So you still do have to notify your sponsor if you are planning to not pay them for meals. You need to let them know why and how many meals, and that is in your contract. All right, delivery and billing. This is something that we don't really talk about a whole lot, but it is important. Your contract, you are being charged for your contract on a per meal basis, which means that you are agreeing upon a price per meal and you are to be charged a price per meal. Nothing more, nothing less. If you agree that you're going to pay $2 per lunch that is provided to you by your contractor, then the number of meals that they provided you for that month or that billing period would be multiplied by $2. And that's what you should be charged. And so as a sponsor, it really is important that you make sure that you're tracking that and that they are charging you according to how many meals they provided you. And that goes for if they're providing adult meals. There really should not be a separate charge for adult meals. It is a per meal price. So if they're providing 50 meals, there should be no differentiation between what goes to an adult and what goes to a child. If that's the case, it's still the same price per meal because the serving sizes would be the same. So keep that in mind. So make sure your records match their records and what they're billing you. Now, as far as the specifications for meals, this is a form that we've had for years, and I think it really gives a lot of good information. So part of this form, Exhibit E, which is the specifications, and this would be for each site that you have on that contract. So you may have more than one location that the contractor is providing meals to, and so each location would have a separate Exhibit E. But on this form, this will indicate the delivery time that the vendor and the sponsor have agreed on as far as when meals will be delivered, and then the estimated number of meals per day. So that's just your estimate. That's not necessarily the hard and fast how many meals, but it does give you and it gives us an idea of how many meals are being provided to that particular location each day. So I want to make sure that you're aware that the delivery time is part of the contract. So if your vendor and you agree that meals will be delivered like lunches will be delivered at 10:30 a.m., and the contractor routinely delivers meals at 11 a.m., then they are outside of their contract. They are not complying with that contract. And so you need to either address that with the contractor and have them deliver the meals at the appropriate time, or you need to agree upon a new time and revise that time. So, but that just because a contractor delivers meals when they want to does not mean that's okay. That was an agreed upon time. So, in summary on delivery and billing, basically the part of it that is the sponsor's responsibility is to make sure that they are complying with what they say they are going to do in their contract, as far as what they're charging you, when they're bringing meals, etc. Now, when you are getting ready to have a contract that is about ready to expire, we have it set up in CanClaim to send out a notification, an email notification to the authorized representative 60 days before that contract expiration date. And that is a date that is entered into the site application for each site. So according to that date, a notification email will be sent to the authorized rep saying that you have a meal contract that is getting ready to expire. And so that should be your heads up. If you receive that email, that would be your heads up to begin thinking about procurement of the new contract. So that would be basically the process then of contacting potential vendors for a new contract for the new year. It is important that there are no gaps in your contract dates. The new contract should be ready and should be signed, ready to go, really ideally before the previous contract is expired, or at the time that the previous contract is expired, so that there are no gaps in contract dates. So what happens if there is a gap in contract dates? Basically it reflects the sponsor not following procurement requirements. So if we were to look at that on an administrative review, it may be a finding that the sponsor didn't follow procurement requirements. It does not necessarily mean that you cannot claim meals if you still have documentation from the vendor about the meals, like the transport sheets and the meals complied with the meal pattern. You could claim reimbursement for those, but keep in mind also that what you're paying for those meals would not necessarily be an allowable cost to your nonprofit food service fund. So there's some little things that go into that kind of make things a little bit more complicated. So make sure, in order to be in compliance with the procurement procedures, that you are getting that new contract and procuring it properly with your price quotes to new vendors, potential new vendors, and having that documented with the new contract. When you upload your contract into CANClaim, when you have a new meal contract, we do request that you upload the price quotation record with that contract. And in the past, we have asked for you to upload menus with that contract so that we can review them as well. And so if you have a new contract mid-year, meaning that it's not during the program certification time for you as a sponsor, there is a place in CANClaim under the checklist tab where you can upload the new contract information. I think it's like an additional documents section that will allow you to upload that information. So one thing that I do want to mention, kind of as we're coming down to a close, is how this really affects you as far as your administrative reviews. So we do have several questions in our administrative review where we are looking at these things, looking at how you're monitoring your contract, making sure that the contractor, the vendor, is supplying you the documentation that you need. Are there transport sheets on file? Are they complete? Do you have labels to show whole grain rich or sugar limits? Do you have CN labels to support the foods that you're serving? So we are looking at those things on our administrative reviews and evaluating the compliance with that. So if you're not monitoring and you're not staying on top of your meal contract, then that could result in findings on an administrative review. So keep that in mind, that it is important that you stay on top of these contracts and these vendors. So as an overview, pretty plain and simple. Follow our procurement procedures. If you have questions about the procurement procedures, please contact your consultant. That's what we are here for. We are happy to help you answer any procurement questions. You can contact your consultant. If you can't get a hold of your consultant, and if you're trying to answer something right away, you can always call our Topeka office. and I would be happy to help you. Our assistant directors would be happy to help you. So please make sure that you are following those procedures. And second, know what your contract says. Make sure you read through the contract. I know it seems like it's a long contract. It's a lot of pages, but it really doesn't take too long to read through the meat of it, which is basically what your responsibilities are and what the contractor's responsibilities are. So please make sure you read through that contract and you know what it says. Know what you agreed to. We do have certain items in the contract that are open to you indicating a time frame, like we had talked about before. Know what those time frames are. And lastly, monitor your contract. Like we talked about, making sure that the menus that they're providing to you are meeting requirements. Don't just assume that what they're serving meets requirements. Make sure that the transport sheets are detailed and give you information so that you can make sure, looking at it, that they're providing you a sufficient amount of food. So there is a monitoring component that is important, and that goes back then to your purchasing plan and indicating who's going to monitor that contract. So there should be people indicated on your purchasing plan, or positions indicated on your purchasing plan, to show who will be responsible for that monitoring. And so we had a question. That's a good question. I talked about making a change to the delivery time in your contract. That would not constitute needing to do a new contract. I would, I think the best way to go about it would be to have both parties initial that specification page on the contract to indicate the new time. So if the vendor initials that page, or an email, some kind of documentation that both parties agreed to a new delivery time, and then put it with your contract. That would not be something that would constitute having to do a new contract. Thank you for that question. That was a good question. While I'm waiting for other questions to come in, that is the information that I have for you. We always welcome feedback from you on any of the trainings or the webinars that we do. So I would encourage you to go to that link and complete our SurveyMonkey for the webinar and give us your feedback if you would like to. We'd be happy to hear your comments about the webinar and if it was helpful for you. Again, if you would like to receive the PowerPoint slides in a PDF format after we get done today, send me an email. My email is at the beginning of the comments, and I'll be happy to send you those. Thank you, Jill. Jill posted the link for the SurveyMonkey, so you can just click on that link and it will take you right to the survey. Okay, so let's see the next question. If we have several sites in different towns that contract with one catering service, but the catering service has different directors in the different towns, that's an interesting question. So the the vendor has different directors. That might be something that we would maybe need to talk with you one-on-one about. Basically, the idea is that if you have one company, let's say it's a company that is vending your meals, and they're supplying meals for you in different facilities in different towns, as long as it's that same company, then you can have one contract with the different the Exhibit E, which is the specifications. It wouldn't necessarily depend on that company having different directors, because we're looking at the company, the organization that you're contracting with, not a specific person. But But if you have more questions about that, Deborah, if that didn't clarify it for you, please let us know and we'd be happy to talk with you more about your situation. CN labels that are dated a year or two, I would ask for current CN labels. You know, in a year or two, companies can change their recipes on things. And so I would almost make that an annual request with your contract that they supply current CN labels. So I would, if they're 2 years old, I would request new ones, or verify that they are using the same product. So I mean, I think it's reasonable that if they are using the same product, that it could be the same CN label. So I think you need to either request a new one or verify that it is the same product and that it is the most current CN label. That sounds great, Deborah. I'd be happy to talk with you. Or you can even contact your consultant, but I would be happy to talk with you as well. All right, well, I am going to wrap up the webinar. I will keep it open as far as available for you to put in any more questions that you have. So I'll stay on, but I am done with my information. So I just want to thank everyone for logging in today and listening in on the webinar. I hope it gave you some helpful information. And again, please contact us with any questions. It is a lot to sometimes keep track of everything that we're asking you to do. So please let us know if we can be of any assistance to you in any part of this process. Thanks, guys.